anybody here who's played a game of Monopoly before? Yeah, I think probably almost everybody here. Well, I played a lot of Monopoly growing up. And in fact, I would say that Monopoly was my first real experience dealing with money. I mean, it wasn't real money, but it certainly felt real at the time when we were playing the game. You know, it felt sweet to pass go and collect that $200. And it really sucked to land on one of my opponent's squares and have to pay exorbitant rents. It's kind of like living in Vancouver. Now, if you've ever played a game of Monopoly before, you might recall that at the outset of the game, the world seems full of possibilities. You've got plenty of cash in your hand, the game board lies waiting to be conquered, and the first few rounds around the board seem like plenty of harmless fun, very little risk, plenty of opportunity. As the game goes on, however, things begin to change. As people start buying up the properties and start loading them up with houses and hotels, the stakes are raised considerably. And sooner or later, you find that every move that you make can be disastrously costly, either for you or for one of your opponents. Now, at this stage in the game, those with very little money or property find it very difficult to climb back out of poverty. It's a game where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Now, unfortunately, a game of Monopoly isn't that dissimilar from what we have in reality. We have tremendous inequality in our world. If you just look at North America, the top 1% wealthiest people control over half of all wealth. And here in BC, more than 1 in 6 children live in poverty. Now, sometimes we as kids growing up did something with our Monopoly games that, looking back, was really kind of brilliant. We ditched the game board, we ditched the rules, we'd keep only the Monopoly money, and we'd use it to run our own kid economies with their own rules. So I remember having whole marketplaces down in the basement together with my siblings and cousins where we would use Monopoly money to trade between ourselves. We each had our own little businesses. And it worked. It didn't matter to us that it wasn't real money. It wasn't the money that the grown-ups used. We simply made an agreement that Monopoly money was money in our world. And it worked. Now, when you think about it, kids are some of the greatest problem solvers on the planet. They'll solve problems, they'll figure things out that most adults would find extremely daunting. For example, have you ever seen how two kids who speak entirely different languages can figure out ways to communicate with one another? Now, they do this by building a common language. They find common ground. And it's based on gestures and sounds and words that they borrow from each other's languages. So in other words, what the kids are doing is they're making a new agreement amongst themselves about what language is going to be between them. Now, kids like Khayyam and all the other kids that he was just talking about are really perfect examples of what I'm talking about. They see more possibilities than barriers. And I think kids like that can change the world. In fact, I'm willing to bet that they're probably the only ones who can. I'm obviously not a kid anymore. I'm 30 years old. But I'm thankful that I can at least still sometimes see the world with a child's eyes. So I look around me and I see a world that's full of underused resources on the one hand and unmet needs on the other hand. And I ask myself why the world of grown-ups can't do what would seem obvious to any kid. And that's find creative and imaginative ways to match those resources with those needs. So what do I mean when I talk about underused resources? Well, I'm talking about things like, take for instance, spaces that are just sitting empty and unused, or tools that could be shared but aren't. Or people. People are the greatest underused resource. People who are unemployed or who, for whatever other reason, just have not been empowered to share their full gifts and skills and abilities and time with their community. And then there are all kinds of underused resources found in our local business community. So any empty table at a restaurant, or any unbooked appointment hour, or any vacant seat in a theater is really a lost opportunity to generate wealth in our communities. And I have to ask myself, how can so much potential wealth exist alongside so much need and poverty and unemployment? Now, I knew that there has to be a better way. And so I ended up doing what any sensible kid would do in this situation. I got together with some friends and we started our own money. The money that we created was called Seedstock, and it's a community currency that we launched right here in Vancouver earlier this year. So what on earth is a community currency, you might be wondering? Well, a community currency is simply a form of money that's created by people within a community to be used within that community. So a really good example of that is when we were kids using Monopoly money to trade amongst ourselves in the basement. We were actually creating a community currency for our community, even though we didn't know the term at the time. Now, when I grew up and I went on to university and started studying economics, I became very curious about money. I mean, money is everywhere. We use it every day. And it has such a tremendous influence on our lives. And yet it's such a huge mystery still to most of us. You know, where does money come from? What gives it its value? And why does it so often seem as though there's just not enough to go around? So it was around that time that I also started learning about places all over the world that were creating their own forms of currency, either to solve serious economic problems or simply to build stronger and more connected local communities. I was absolutely amazed by what I learned. So here were whole cities and towns and regions who were doing the same thing, essentially, that we as kids were already doing in the basement with our Monopoly money. They started their own money. So I didn't learn about any of this in any of my economics classes at university, by the way. But I started to realize that if we could change the way that we create and use money, we could change the world for the better. So the currency that I helped to create here in Vancouver, Seedstock, is designed to fill in the gaps where regular money fails. It does this by helping local nonprofits raise money for their community causes, while also helping local businesses fill some of their empty tables, seats, and appointment bookings. So we believe that by bringing businesses, nonprofits, and people together, we can create a cycle of exchange in which everyone wins. Now, sometimes when we show people Seedstock, some of them can't help but crack a joke comparing it to Monopoly money. And I don't really mind this as much as you might think, because it gives me a really good opportunity to explain to people how a community currency is anything but a game of Monopoly. If our economy is a game, we're introducing people to the possibility of a new type of game, one that's not driven by fierce competition and poverty and bankruptcy the way a game of Monopoly is, but one that promotes cooperation, sharing, and abundance. And yet, when people compare our community currency with Monopoly money, their words hold more truth than they realize. Because ultimately, all of these new currencies that are popping up around the world, including here in Vancouver, are being inspired by the same spirit with which we as kids used Monopoly money in the basement to overcome the hurdles of being kids without money. I believe powerfully that if more adults remembered what we already knew as kids, and if you kids remember not to forget, we can not only change our money, but we can change our world for the better. Thank you.